Thanks. And hi, everyone. Today it's with great pleasure that I'm joined, that David Farrell is actually sharing the stage with me today. He's the CEO of FinClear, and we are going to be discussing a very new and exciting world where private assets are tokenized and traded on secondary platforms, and the role that FCX is actually playing in that. So Dave, firstly, what actually is FCX and why did you build it?
Thanks, Tracy, and nice to meet everyone. Please, no one else walk out, and we've got a small crowd now on tokenisation. So tokenisation is what we're here to talk about, and the best way for me to talk about that is what we're doing with FCX. So what is FCX? FCX is our private platform for unlisted companies. It's built on DLT, distributed ledger technology. Today it's a registry or cap table management. It will also over time facilitate secondary transactions, primary transactions as well on ledger, facilitated by smart contracts, and I'll talk I think tomorrow more about smart contracts. And ultimately it will become a liquidity venue as well, so an opportunity for companies, early stage companies and growing companies not yet ready to go to, say, a full market listing on the ASX, but avail themselves of a liquidity venue. The reason we build it is really simple. So FinClear as a business is 7 years old. We've gone through 3, 4 or 5 private capital raises ourselves. We have fairly mature investors on our cap table, from large family offices to high net worths, VC funds, PEs. And the resounding feedback through our journey has always been on that side, there needs to be a centralised platform capability to host unlisted companies. And from our perspective, the complexity around managing cap raises yourself as a small company is incredibly onerous, time-consuming and fractured. And so really what we've built in terms of FCX is a platform capability to make that experience much more friendly. And today, you know, we've got lots of early stage fintech businesses here for those sorts of companies to come and host themselves on FCX, avail themselves of that opportunity, capability.
While FCX is a platform for unlisted securities, is there actually an opportunity for listed companies as well?
Yes, there is. What we're essentially doing is building what I would call a more efficient ecosystem based on tokenisation of securities and smart contracts that enable you to provide a much more streamlined service capability or infrastructure for those companies to sit on, and also for to host other different types of products as well. But ultimately, what it means is it may well mean that companies want to stay private longer, and there are large companies at the moment choosing to stay private longer, and particularly if they can avail themselves of a platform capability, centralised, tokenised securities, and the ability to get access to liquidity. So companies will stay private longer, we think, but also it's an opportunity for even companies that sit on public exchanges, listed exchanges, where they may decide to go the other way. Smaller scale companies, it doesn't make sense to sit on say the ASX. The regulatory costs and the listing costs and the continuous disclosure regulatory regime are very expensive. And so you may find that companies decide to go back if they can still get a similar result in terms of liquidity capability.
So all assets on the FCX will be tokenised?
Yeah, so look, as of today, we are our first client. So FinClear today, our cap table sits on FCX. we've got quite a mature or sophisticated cap table in terms of we have 3 separate securities. We have 8 normal A-class shares. We then have an ESOP program, and we have loan-funded shares or a debt facility, debt security also sitting on our cap table. So today it hosts FinClear, and we're onboarding other companies as we speak. I think we've onboarded a few more companies this week, and we've got a very strong pipeline. But the capability is also potentially to list other asset classes as well.
So do you see a world where peer-to-peer can also trade?
Look, that's a really interesting question. At the moment, FCX is what we call a closed infrastructure or closed platform. It's what we call also a non-permissioned, but sitting within regulatory guidelines. And what that means, to get away from all the jargon, is you still need to come on board to the platform. You need to be KYC'd, AML'd, hence the sit within regulatory guidelines. But once you're on board, onboarded onto platform, then you can trade potentially, and as the liquidity comes online, peer-to-peer. Now, in terms of it being completely decentralised and for anyone to come on board to that platform, that's some time away. We have the capability to do that over time, but of course it's subject to regulatory regime. One of the things that we've done with FCX is build it within that regulatory regime, within those rails, because we think that these businesses need to be regulated. There needs to be transparency from a regulator's perspective, and the technology that we use in terms of the DLT and tokenisation of securities needs to be in a trusted ecosystem for now. But of course that will likely change over time, and that's, you know, we hear that the whole time, and that's obviously why we're here today as well.
So Visa has recently announced that it's issued more than 4 billion tokens worldwide. This is more than double the total from 12 months ago. And for the first time ever, it's actually more than the physical Visa cards that are in circulation worldwide. This has meant that they now have over 8,600 issuers and 800,000 merchants that are using the service. And it had led to phenomenal results where there's actually been a reduction of 28% in fraud rates and improvement of 3% in approval rates. With such significant results, is tokenisation going to be the future of our financial ecosystem?
The short answer is yes. The long answer is it's more about the technology. So it's more about the distributed ledger capability and then the smart contract capability that layers over that. And to put that into a bit more context, at FinClear, so the company, obviously parent company of FCX, we sit over and we do millions of transactions a year in listed world. And it's a pretty inefficient ecosystem, and listed markets are globally highly regulated, high capital requirements, what's called T+2 settlement, all makes it a very cumbersome environment. What distributed ledger technology does is potentially enable, and to your point before, enable peer-to-peer counterparts, but the smart contract capability and layers that puts around it starts to let you automate functions. If this happens, then that. And so from a infrastructure perspective, we have today about 180 people across our business. We manage millions of transactions in listed world. We're just looking to apply this technology also into that old world over time and create more efficiencies, because it's about the efficiencies that you bring. It's about what we call the layers of fees and counterparts that you can remove out of an ecosystem and make less touch points.
So when do you think that tokenisation will become the norm?
I guess, well, I would say tokenisation in Australia has, in a more simple form, been with us for 30 years. It's no surprise that I've been for some time a big supporter of the ASX CHESS replacement project, and I think we've got members of ASX here with us today. That project hasn't been without its problems. However, the concept of it and what they're doing is very forward-thinking, but you've got to also look to what they did 30 years ago, which was really groundbreaking. Because here in Australia, we have digitisation of securities. We have the capability for end investors, retail investors, to hold securities in their own name. Now, for people who buy and sell shares in Australia, you say, well, so what? But if you go to any other regulated market globally, it's a different infrastructure. You don't hold shares in your own name. They're held by a custodial bank that then runs a ledger beneath that. And you lose a whole lot of benefits that we here as Australians have around direct ownership of shares. So CHESS was introduced as a means to hold digitised securities directly. And so I would say Australia's in a great position to actually be at the forefront of tokenisation of securities and other asset classes, because we've had an early form of this for 30 years. Investors are used to getting a CHESS statement or getting a statement from their broker and showing name on register. Tokenisation of securities is just an evolution of that, and what tokenisation does is start to put smart contract capabilities around those securities. Again, to my point before, if this happens, then that. So you start to remove touch points in particularly our world, a clearing and settlement infrastructure where it's a much more straight-through process. And so those efficiencies are what's going to be the benefit of everyone over time, and why I think that the ASX CHESS replacement project, while being difficult and very complex, and they would say the complexity is what's causing the delay, is such an important milestone for the Australian market.
So the ASX Symphony project was hailed as taking the latest step towards tokenisation. Is the ASX going to offer tokenised trading soon?
Well, to my previous point, sort of, when CHESS was replaced, it'll be sort of tokenised trading, but it's not really about that from my perspective. It's the efficiencies that the smart contract capability around clearing and settling, automating things like dividend streams or share splits or rights issues, those sorts of things as well, rather than very manual processes that we undertake every day today. But so Symphony, though, and again ASX are in the room, Symphony is about DLT as a service, and it's inviting other participants to come in, like ourselves, to build onto the distributed ledger, start to add other asset classes. So we're obviously adding unlisted securities, unlisted companies, but in essence you could add, or we could add, any type of asset class onto the distributed ledger. And then what you start having is a series of tokens of different asset classes that can sit alongside listed securities within CHESS as well. And what I call it is, it's about building a wealth platform from the inside out. So wealth platforms in Australia today, most of the big bank ones and the independents are what I call bundled from the outside in. When you go into a wealth platform, all your securities get put into a custodial relationship, so you become a beneficial holder only of those securities and assets sitting in a wealth platform. and you lose the direct investor experience, and you also lose the 24/7 always-on capability. So there's a couple of things about what we're doing here. Is firstly, we're building from the inside out, so we start to add other products, other asset classes that can be tokenized and sit alongside listed securities. And so an investor can start to see their investable world on tokens. And so, that's one of the, a very important step for us, and that's why we're involved and working with the ASX around CHESS replacement, but also why we decided to build FCX so that we can use that technology both in an instance to solve a particular problem, which is unlisted securities, but to add other asset classes and start to build a more holistic wealth platform based on tokenisation of securities.
Ultimately, will this result in democratisation of financial investments with cheaper, easy access to products as well as liquidity and direct ownership?
Again, short answer, absolutely yes. And to my point before, once you start to tokenise securities, once you start to have that peer-to-peer and marketplace, you start opening up to a what I call the new demographic of investors. So I think one of the amazing things that's happened over the last few years around all the development in crypto assets, good and bad, and what's going on there, has been the adoption of technology, of the distributed ledger that underpins it. So the great thing that's come about it is the actual core technology and how that is now being used to provide access to more products and to provide a more efficient and secure ecosystem, and potentially an ecosystem where intermediaries are removed out of the equation, and that capability over time for peer-to-peer interaction. One of the things that I've been very critical of over the years in terms of financial markets, and what I call the old world of financial markets, are the wagon wheel of service providers that add layers of fees around it. So if you look at listed markets at the moment, you have an issuer, obviously, and an investor, and a market to join them together. But then you have a whole range of other service providers, ourselves included, by the way, but banks also, custodians, fund administrators, trustees. The list sort of goes on. And so what I think the DLT and smart contracts enables is the capability for super service providers to start to take away these layers of fees and inefficiencies and bring investors together, potentially over time, peer-to-peer. But I think in terms of regulated markets and products, that doesn't happen for some time because the regulator needs to maintain that oversight transparency. But that's eventually where I see it going.
So I'm going to open the floor to questions now, and there is somebody with a mic that will come to you. So any questions? Yep, over there.
For a lot of DLT use cases, there's a question around scalability, and once it gets bigger and bigger, how do you sort of solve for efficient processing and so on? What's your view on that?
Look, first and foremost, I'm not a tech guy, so I'm not going to get into the details on that. But remember, this is a closed ecosystem where we're using the technology, the distributed ledger capability. We use it for one pure action, and that is exchange of an asset or something else that's intrinsic to a security that sits on it. We don't then start to add multiple layers and complexities. We use what we call our heritage infrastructure, our microserver cloud-based infrastructure to sit around that. And so the infrastructure that we've built, doesn't rely on mining and minting and power to actually, mine coins. It's using the code base to facilitate a transaction. And from my limited tech capability, our core transactional capability is way beyond where we envisage this application going.
Thank you.
Question over here in the third row.
Thanks so much, David. I was just wondering what your thoughts were on what's the low-hanging fruit in terms of assets classes over the next 5 years? Like, is property? Is it listed securities? What's the low-hanging fruit, and what's likely to be the best use cases over the next 5 years?
That's a great question, and I can answer that really, really simply, because from the day we launched FCX, we launched it as a solution to a problem in terms of the low-hanging fruit, which are unlisted companies. And we know that in Australia, there are about 1 million unlisted companies, we believe. Now, lots of them are probably mum and dad partnerships. But even if you distill that down, there are literally hundreds of thousands of reasonable scale, small companies. As of today, ASX sits on about, I think, 2,700 companies. So that's a big opportunity there. And that's the low-hanging fruit from our perspective. But from the day that we announced and launched FCX, we then started to get reverse inquiry on the unlisted fund side. So unlisted funds started coming to us, and some very large, big global counterparts saying, could this be a venue rather than us going into a full-on IPO and public listing through an ASX route? Could this be a capability for us to manage our investors and have regular liquidity events on an unlisted fund? And the answer is absolutely yes, because an unlisted fund looks very much like an unlisted security. And then there's the opportunity I spoke to and Tracy asked me about before. There are sub-scale companies sitting on listed markets at the moment that potentially this environment would be more suitable for as well. And then we've also been approached by other asset classes as well. So debt instruments, insurance instruments, commodity instruments as well. But we're very focused on what we think that big bunch of low-hanging fruit is today, unlisted companies.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Well, I have a final question for you.
We're almost on time.
Yep.
One more question, Tracy.
I've actually met a lot of early-stage companies here today, and certainly FCX potentially would be a venue for all of them. So what's the roadmap?
Yeah, thanks, Tracy. Great question. Doing your job. Let's me talk about the roadmap and where we are today, because the platform's not complete today. As of today, the cap table is live. The registry capability is live. So as I said, our company FinClear is on FCX today. But what it looks like over time, we start to build automated processes. The pain points that came to us around capital raising, so all the documentation shuffle that needs to happen between a registry and the lawyers, a capital advisor or an investment bank, company secretary, issuance of share certificates, gathering subscription monies into bank accounts, all those very manual processes that happen at the moment in an unlisted company environment start to get automated through those layers of smart contracts that we start putting over the tokens. So that gets delivered in the next few months. We also bring cash onto token as well, and that will be in the very near future, in the next month or so. So that allows cash to be deposited into an omnibus account, but to be tokenized on platform. And the great thing about that is that once you tokenize cash onto platform, put it onto ledger, you can start to do really exciting things like atomic settlement of transactions, meaning that if you have buyers and sellers of shares, then it's an instantaneous transfer of title of those shares and cash, because it's all sitting on ledger, facilitated by smart contracts. And that's the component to me that's really exciting, because that then starts to put efficiencies, or the capability for us to put efficiencies back into our other business, or our more mature listed business, which again is why we've built FCX as a precursor to where we think listed markets over time goes. And then the final piece in terms of the roadmap is the liquidity venue. And that's probably not until next year sometime. And that probably requires a licensing capability as well that we need to work through. But once you bring those components together, the cap table and smart contracts sitting on ledger, the automated functions to enable primary and secondary, and then liquidity for peer-to-peer to start trading with you, we think that that's going to be a pretty cool piece of infrastructure. Today, that capability to bring companies on board, so we've brought a couple of companies on board in the last week or so. We moved out of test only a few weeks ago and started onboarding private companies just in the last few weeks, and that's the first step to get them onto ledger and to tokenise those securities. So stage 1 done, stage 2 in the next few months, and then that full liquidity venue not until next year sometime.
Well, thank you so much for your insights today, and please join me in thanking David.